Future Now Show. Brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam.
Welcome to the Future Now Show. Today's title is Plastic Pollution Unwrapped, Challenges and Opportunities. We have an exciting guest, Doug Woodring. Doug is the founder of Ocean Recovery Alliance and lead expert for the Rebound Plastic Exchange, the global trading platform for recycled plastic. Doug, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Felix. Well, I'm going to give hopefully people a big deep dive on plastic, maybe some things you didn't quite realize, to give you the whole spectrum of where the problems come from, and then maybe some different solutions and angles. Hopefully it will inspire some of you, maybe some of you already working in this space, but if you're companies or governments, municipalities, there's a lot of things that could be done which we haven't really focused on in wholehearted fashion yet. So a lot of opportunities there. My name is Doug Woodring. I'm usually based in Hong Kong. I've been there more than 25 years. I founded Ocean Recovery Alliance 12 years ago, originally from California. I have a different background than a lot of ocean people. I'm not an ecologist or a scientist, but I have a master's business degree from the business side of things. And when you're talking about plastic, that really makes a big difference, because all of the solutions are outside of the ocean, and where the brands are, where the cities are, where the people consume, policies, packaging, all of those things, recycling. So I got my start in thinking about the ocean a lot when I was in Japan, my first job out of undergraduate. I went to UC Berkeley, went to Japan when it was booming. I became one of the first foreigners ever to work in the biggest fishing company in the world, or one of them. And I learned a lot about trading seafood. I was not working in Tsukiji fish market like this picture shows, but I certainly went there. But we were trading bulk commodity of fish, 600 tons, 1,000 tons, 2,000 tons at a time, between countries. And that was going to the packing industry, fresh market, many different packing as in canning. And the real thing that I learned was the volume of seafood that the world, pulls out of the ocean every day to go to all the big cities of the world. So we all have different choices for our seafood at the restaurants. And to be honest, I believe the sushi fad of the 80s was a huge, huge, huge detriment to the ocean. Nobody really talks about sushi as that being that, but it was the Starbuckization of interesting fish. And what that means is people wanted the high-end fish, the expensive big ones, the remote ones, the exotic ones. And in doing that, a lot of other fish was caught, thrown away, wasted, and we depleted the oceans pretty quickly. Now 80% of them, big fish, are all gone. Almost all of the ocean waters are overfished in some capacity. And so at that time, I said, hey, hopefully one day when I get older, I'm going to do something to protect the ocean and help the cause. So that's one of my reasons for doing this. The other is that I do a lot of sports. I still compete in outrigger canoe racing internationally, race in Hong Kong and other countries. I'm an open water swimmer. I organize some of the biggest open water swims in Asia for the last 15 years. And when you're in the water all the time, you see a lot of the material that a lot of people don't see day to day on the street, in the park, at their house. I see it in the water, we see it, and you can tell, like a litmus test, when things are bad, when the weather changes, when the winds change. You start thinking, where does this stuff come from? How does it get there? And that's what took me on the journey. We believe that plastic pollution is actually more complicated than climate change. Doesn't mean that it's bigger and stronger, if you want to call it that, higher impact, but it's more complicated. There's at least 40,000 types of plastic. Of course, For those of you who know, there's 7 main families of plastic, but when you get into the chemical differences, the melting points, the colors, the shapes, lack of standardization, it makes it extremely hard to recycle this material when you can't collect it in the right families and the right quantities to give economies of scale for recycling. So everything in this photo, though it looks bad, actually could be used for something with value. If there's value on it, it won't end up in this river. And the problem is most cities, the communities in the world don't have the technologies, whether they're big or small or complicated or not complicated, to get this material into a value proposition stream. In this case, this boy is collecting straws because someone has told him that I'll give you some amount of money for that material if you get it. So he's spending his time to get a bit of money. All of the other material could at least be turned into energy, gasification. Some people don't like that, but at the end of the day, it's much better to get rid of it in that way and at least make something of it than to have it in the water and impact the ecosystem, impact the health of people, et cetera, or to have it just sit in a landfill. It's probably not the best option, but it is one of the options, and it depends where you are in the world. The point is we need to get the recycling going and the sorting in a much better way in our communities so that we can make use of that material in its second life. This is another challenge, is that we have a shifted baseline. That means that people who grew up in this kind of environment as kids think that it's the norm. And unfortunately, many countries are like this today. This was Hong Kong. People went to the beach. They didn't call anyone. They didn't pick anything up. They just tried to have fun and forget about it and move on. And that's one of our challenges when we get into the education system, because if the teachers are not feeling it in their heart and their minds, because they come from a shifted baseline scenario where this was the norm when they grew up, they're not going to be big ambassadors for change. And that is a challenge to then get to the kids. So, of course, the kids can learn quickly, motivate quickly, tell their grandparents and their parents, and they make changes, but the teachers are actually the tough one to get into and get these ideas into some of the classrooms in a bigger scale. One of the reasons we have big issues with waste today is there's not really enough laws and regulations. Retailers can pretty much put anything on their shelves, and the brands can do the same with the retailer. And there's no incentives or taxes or reasons for them to collect the material after they give it to the consumer. In this case, although all of the apples and all of those clamshells around the apple can be highly and easily recycled if they were collected in mass, stacked together at the retailer. Then you have recyclers interested in it because you have economies of scale of that one single material without food waste and without other garbage around it. You don't need to have aluminum sunscreen packed in plastic at all. So that's just a bad design, straightforward. Of course, they're trying to do it so they can sit it on the shelves better. But we really have to think about the silly plastic and how to get rid of the stuff that really is not necessary in our lives. These fruit socks are all over the beaches in Asia. There's no need to have them at the point of retail. People pull them off, but they take them home and then they get lost into the environment and the waste stream. There's no one's going to care about collecting a lightweight piece of styrofoam. But if the retailer actually took these off all of the apples at every single store that they run, then you would have a mass of styrofoam all aggregated cleanly, which can go back to the warehouses in the reverse supply chain and can be perfectly recycled. That's not happening almost anywhere today. You've got things like plastic on coconuts, on bananas, simply because people are lazy to try to put a sticker on it or a barcode. There's no need for that when you really think about it. So we can be a lot smarter. There's definitely no need to have a plastic bag around a Coke at a McDonald's. Asia is the only place where they still use plastic bags on drinks, unfortunately. So there's a proliferation of them everywhere. And that's simply just bad use and bad branding even for Coke, because they're getting a bad image from being inside that bag. The reason we really have a problem is because, like the growth in carbon, this graph that goes up about 45 degrees is the amount of consumption in the last 60 years of plastic, just because it's easy to use, easy to mold, lightweight, colorful, so many things. Everything in our lives has plastic somehow in it. So very difficult to get away from it overall. So we really need to figure out how to use it in its second life. The bottom line is the tragedy of the commons. That is the amount of infrastructure and spending on recycling in the last 60 years also. So it is not kept pace whatsoever with the growth in plastic. Most of the world's sorting facilities and waste collection is set up for glass, paper, and metal, and then plastic came along and it got integrated with food waste. Very difficult to clean both things at that point. So your food waste is wasted as organic because you don't want plastic in it when you're throwing it in as fertilizer, and vice versa. So without this infrastructure, we don't have the capacity to handle all the material that we're creating all around the world. It's not like people want a litter, but they have nowhere to put it. And most municipalities have no way to actually harness it the right way. We believe that, and other reports have come out, that there is a huge amount of investment needed for recycling infrastructure if we're going to put a real slowdown on plastic pollution. And this is a giant opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for manufacturing of machinery, equipment, grinders, shredders, conveyor belts, washers, extruders for the recycling industry. 56 billion in the next 5 years, and 5 to 6 times that in by 2040. So big opportunity there, and that means that increased collection in communities, increased jobs, increased innovation, and the brands can then use more recycled content. This graph is showing recycling versus GNP, GDP. That's the wealthier you are as a country. On the right side, on the upper right, you are wealthier country, you have more chances to have trucks and maybe curbside recycling, better pickup. More material can be controlled in the community and not be lost to the environment or burning. All the other countries down that scale simply don't have the infrastructure, again, because of that chart, that graph that showed the lack of infrastructure and spending. So 12 years ago, imagine, at the Clinton Global Initiative, we were the first to create and announce the world's first plastic footprinting methodology, very much like that of carbon and water footprinting, but for plastic. So that means a company, an institution like a hospital, a stadium, an airport, a school, university, could all measure, and a municipality could all measure their plastic footprint in the means of use, recovery, use of recycled content. And there's really no right or wrong number here. It's not meant to make anyone look bad, but it's meant to have everyone look at themselves in the mirror. And we were probably 10 years too early for this project because the world wasn't ready to do this kind of analysis in most cases, although we did do it with many different groups and companies. UC Berkeley was the first university in the world to do it for the whole campus. The Peninsula Hotel Group was the first hotel in the world to have a plastic policy for their global hotel chain based on doing this. We did work last year during COVID with the United Nations program out of Bangkok to train companies in Malaysia and Thailand and municipalities in a program funded by the government of Sweden. And it's great because people look at themselves and they say, wow, we didn't really think about all those little things and how we could make a difference. And so there's 5 main areas. You can increase recycled content in your products or packaging, that's a huge need for the world, because the more demand there is, the more chances the recyclers will upgrade their capacities and the recovery will come into their sites, because there's incentive and there's money and people want to buy it. This is very important for governments, because governments should always have in their tendering and their procurement recycled content mandates in things that can have recycled content, whether it's chairs, desks, other products in the offices or the infrastructure that can be made of 10%, 20, 30% recycled plastic. That will be a huge demand. Improving recycling programs, that is not just putting a bunch of bins around at schools and clapping your hands and saying that you did a great job. This is about getting your employees engaged in the community you work with, about getting your customers engaged, having bring back programs like bringing the apples, clamshells back, as I mentioned. All kind of things can be done with reverse supply chain. That goes into less packaging in the supply chain, where there's a back of a house, back of warehouse. A lot of material is often discarded and not thought about to aggregate maybe with other warehouses of similar types in the region or the community where they can really make recycling work. Of course, new designs, that includes reusability, longer term. New materials can be biomaterials. We do support that. Some people say that biomaterials know better than plastic, and we disagree with that wholeheartedly. If you have a plastic straw that is biodegradable, the real one the petroleum-based one might last 100 or 200 years. If the biodegradable one gets in the environment, even if it lasts 1 or 2 years, that's already much better than 100 or 200 years. So if we kill it now, then you're not going to ever have innovation to drive that to be even better than that. So we need to start thinking about how that can work. Every day, there's more than 2 billion people impacted by plastic pollution. That is not the case yet for climate change. 2 billion people impacted by bad water, bad cleaning, bad health, bad tourism, bad fishing, bad agriculture. And we can all actually make a difference there, because when you think about it, every single piece of plastic that gets thrown away leaves someone's hand. So we're one hand away from fixing this. Now, of course, all those hands don't have anywhere to put things all the time. So a lot of it gets burned. Estimates are, I'm sure you heard these numbers, 8 million. We estimate it's probably 5 million, 4 million. It doesn't matter. Once you're in the millions, it's still way too much material. So that's not really relevant. The point is, we can't contain it because we didn't do the infrastructure investment in the past. Second life plastic is the key here. That's why we talked about the demand for the brands and governments to buy more and use more of it. Only 10% of the world's plastic roughly today actually gets recycled, even though all of those little symbols at the bottom with a triangle that says I'm recyclable doesn't mean they make their way into the infrastructure to be recycled. So if you're a brand and you're selling to 180 countries, maybe 5 of them can recycle the product that you're selling, but maybe 175 of them can't, and that's a problem. So we need to be able to get all of this material that's being exported everywhere to be able to be handled everywhere or moved to places where it can be handled. Today, there are many of the largest multinationals making very big commitments on plastic, recycled plastic use, 10 or 20, actually usually it's 20 to 30% recycled content within the next 5 years. Nestle, for example, pledged to commit $2 billion by 2025. But the problem is they can't get their hands on it. There's not enough supply of all of this material from the waste streams because we never invested in the capacities to be able to collect it, sort it, clean it, and grind it and process it, pelletize it so it can go back into the packages and the products that these big brands need. So that's big opportunity for everyone involved. We believe there's a 6 million ton shortfall in the next few years coming annually of recycled plastic feedstock if all of the big brands are to meet their commitments of 20 to 30% increased recycled content. That's a very big market and very big opportunity, again, not only for the machine makers, but obviously for the ones who are processing and collecting, with a growth of 30% up to 45 billion in the next couple of years on recycled content as well as a market. Interestingly, in the past, a lot of the trade flow has been west to east or north to south, mostly for wage arbitrage to go to countries where they can process it cheaply, mostly by hand, at least at the sorting level. They have poor environmental standards, usually poor washing, and most of those governments also don't really have the capacity to oversee and keep the quality control on these facilities. And this is why, as some of you might know, in China, they banned the import of plastic feedstock for recycling about 4 or 5 years ago, because there were so many rogue traders who were just bringing it into the country unenforced, and they would hand sort it in their backyards or in a big yard somewhere where their neighbors, pick out the good stuff, maybe 10, 15, maybe 80%, but then the 20% or 40% of the bad stuff got dumped or burned. And that's what everyone wanted to put an end on. That generally has happened now because of regulations. But when you think of the flow of trade now, the North wants the material. The big brands are the ones from the North. They want the feedstock. And the South is the one that has it and has less infrastructure to supply it. And we believe that there will be a shift in trade as the capacities grow from the countries that have many, many people and not very good waste management today. As their capacities grow for recycling, they will be able to move that material back into the North for use. Interestingly, this is not infrastructure and technology that you need that is super, super expensive. You cannot put giant machines that you would put in a big city into communities all around the world in multiples of 1,000. What you need is cleaning machines, grinding, shredding machines, extruders. A lot of these systems cost less than even $500,000, but a good plant might be a few $1,000,000 to do it pretty well. And that is not enough money for getting a lot of attention by the World Banks or the ADBs, Asian Development Banks, the large grant multilaterals, or of course, venture funding or financing. So this is where there's always been a gap, always been a super challenge to get thousands and thousands of machines into smaller communities so that they can start to make value and reach into the market to get into a bigger market where the aggregators and processors can handle that material. So some of the great stuff that we have launched actually last week, we've been working on this for 18 months, something we initiated. We have been working with IHC out of Abu Dhabi, who's supporting this, supported by the UAE government. New plastic exchange called Rebound. This allows for business-to-business trading of large volumes of feedstock for recycling at scale. And the beauty is that we're bringing in certification, verification, and trust. And trust is the key word here because it's lacking in most of the worlds, whether it's at the community level, the state level, the federal level, and the international level. Trust that recycling is not really working anymore or at the scale it should work. There was too much corruption. There's too much trade of illicit materials. That is now coming to an end because what China started on the ban, that's good. But now we've almost swung too far on the pendulum. And now it's very hard to actually move materials into countries that can actually process it at the scale that everyone needs. And that hurts the domestic recycling in that country because they can't get enough feedstock collected domestically, nor can their bigger machines now operate because the feedstock supply has been hindered because of some of the regulations that are oversights in the way that we move a commodity such as plastic, which is very, very valuable. So we're unlocking that jam, unjamming that log jam, if you want to call it that, using third-party certifiers to inspect bales, flakes, and pellets. And this brings transparency into the trading process, hopefully at the very benefit of all of the governments who become involved in support of this, because this allows them to both process more material in country or create jobs by getting quality material out of their country into other countries that can then get it up the value chain. And this is not waste. So this is always good material that has a use and needs to be used, and it complies and complements the Basel Convention. So this incentivizes proper collection at the village and community level, brings job creation, innovation, new capacity investment in expanding machines and equipment, and helps the brands meet their quotas for recycled content. Now, that's on the business side of moving material, but we still have big issues with rivers, creeks, and basically the blood vessels that go into the ocean. This is another project we announced at the Clinton Initiative 10 years ago. We launched it about 6 years ago with the World Bank, partly funded. It's already in Spanish, called Global Alert. It's an app that lets you report trash hotspots anywhere in the world's waters, mainly meant for rivers and creeks. If you think of plastic as cholesterol, think of the creeks and rivers as blood vessels. Think of the ocean as the heart. It's much easier to catch the cholesterol going to the blood vessel when there's a riverbank than a big open mass of ocean when it's floating at sea. So this app allows you to fly right into any watershed in the world. And as long as you have stakeholders who know that people are reporting, we don't need a lot of people reporting. You could have a school of 8th graders and 4 kids doing it twice a month. And that's already more data than most water supplies departments and river keeper groups have already in many of these countries. So you can have pretty interesting reporting, great for community, company engagement, get people out on the weekends, but you have to have someone watching the reporting so that you then decide, oh, we're gonna do a cleanup at this place next week, the next week, and or even better, put up a boom or a net or a catchment device in one of these creeks or rivers or waterways. You might have heard that 10 of the biggest rivers in the world, mostly in Asia, contribute to 80% of the world's waste going to the ocean. That is definitely false and a wrong number. There are millions of rivers and waterways and tributaries. If you look at any of the big rivers around the world, they do not have just masses of trash floating on the top of them. They're relatively governed, and there's laws about putting that stuff in those rivers. Of course, a lot of it does sink and it goes down and floats along the silted bottom and you can't see it. But that doesn't still mean those rivers are contributing as much as that report says. We need to look at these kind of rivers, this one's in Malaysia. Kuala Lumpur has 100 sites like this in the city. I think it's one of the best cities in the world that's really focused on this. And you don't need high tech. This is a wooden fence. You can design it so it doesn't block boating traffic. It doesn't stop fish. You're just getting surface trash. These guys pick out 100 to 200 kilos every day, and getting it out of the water is already a great step in getting it out of our environment. Eventually, you can then start thinking about where it comes from, who is it from, how do we prevent it, how do we make use of it, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't start focusing at this point, you'll never get to the next step. You can see the huge change in water clarity on the left and the right. When you do this, you build trust. You build trust with the community. They then realize that the water can be clean, and they start to feel pride in their creek and river and start taking advantage of keeping it safe. So one of the projects we're also very proud of is something in Cambodia. 2 events we do a year called the Water Falling Festival and the Water Rising Festival. In the Tonle Sap Lake, it's the only lake in the world that goes up and down 6 meters every season in the Mekong Delta area, very flat, shallow lake. But when the water goes out, it pulls the plastic out of the villages into the lake. And when it comes back in, it does the reverse. And so this is a celebration for the water. Be proud of the water, be proud of your environment. Not a cleanup. We had monks, government officials, fishermen, really got people thinking about it. We did do a cleanup, but it was really more about building awareness and literally getting it out of the trees, because when the water drops, it gets stuck in all the trees and bushes. That's bad for tourism. We then used our global alert app in the river coming out of Siem Reap town, if some of you have been there, near Angkor Wat. And we got the fishermen involved, the village chiefs. The villages along the river had never worked together before. It sounds crazy, but they each have their own little town and they never really worked together because they didn't need to. When we did this, they all became responsible for their own net and their own section of waterway. And so the guy downstream would blame the guy upstream if he wasn't doing a good job, and and the guy even farther downstream would blame all of them upstream. And they all started to realize that they could do this together and help the water that goes into the lake. And they loved it. And as soon as the water was cleaned from the surface material, the monks said, my gosh, finally we can tell people that they will have bad karma if they put the plastic in the water and they throw their trash in there. And the reason is because before that, there was no trust. The river was dirty. The monk would say, do not throw your trash in the water, please. And people would sort of say, well, whatever, there's a lot of other trash there, and it doesn't matter. Once you clean it, totally changes. In fact, what happened in this local government, within 1 week created a fine, a penalty to charge people if they put their garbage bags on the river side of the road. The river has roads on each side of it and houses, and they were putting their bags on the riverside. So of course, when it rained and the wind came, all the trash goes in the water and goes downstream. Once it was clean, they had perfect reason to enact the fine, and it's amazing now to see how that all works. So we pulled 15 to 20 tons out in the initial cleanup of that. Really made a great impact. There's something else we're now doing as ongoing work, not just the 2 festivals, but we created a rice bag, designed a rice bag, but for harvesting plastic, not for waste, not for rice. And we gave these big bags printed in Khmer, which is Cambodian language, and English, to a lot of the villages and the remote areas, because they have no waste treatment. So their option is dump it in the water then it gets caught in the propellers and does all the other damage, or burn it. And something the ocean community doesn't talk a lot about is the burning of plastic and waste. And that is estimated to be up to 40% of the world's waste being burned open pit. That's not being incinerated, not being used for energy. That causes 3 major issues. Immediate respiratory problems if you're near the smoke, carbon black, which is very bad for global warming because the soot absorbs heat in the atmosphere, and also, of course, the toxins from all the chemicals in the plastic. When they get burned, they get into the clouds and then they rain back into our food system, whether that's rice paddies, farmland, or waters where fish and other things are that we might eat and enter our food chain. So this is a program that people bring it in. They fill their bag from their household only with plastic. Food waste goes outside into the environment where it's helpful. Paper, glass, metal is now separated and in a different bag, but plastic now is clean. It is easier to sort, much more easier to make value from. And during COVID, we were giving away food baskets for one big bag of plastic that they harvested when they brought it into the pagoda. So that's an ongoing program that we're growing, actually starting to replicate it in different countries, including Indonesia, potentially Vietnam, and Kenya very soon. One of the other things that we can do with this material now is take this mixed dirty plastic and not actually even sort it, dry wash it, meaning just getting the pebbles and the gravel out of it, and turn it into synthetic aggregate. And this aggregate looks like concrete. Sorry, it looks like lava when you look at it very closely, but when you grind it up, it does become aggregate, lightweight aggregate for cement blocks and the building industry. This is highly designed. It is not a plastic brick at all. You only put 6 or 8% of the material into a brick. You're not putting 40 or 50% in. Makes it the brick lighter, stronger, insulated, and it absorbs this little pile, the equivalent of 10 or 12 plastic bottles. Now, you would not use the plastic bottles in the brick because they're more valuable recycled in their own manner. But if they did come from the ocean or the river and they're really dirty and can't be used for normal recycling, they could be used. But the point is, you can now take this material and make things stronger and better. And if you actually take all of the plastic made on the planet every year, which is 370 million tons, and you put it into the world's concrete demand every year, you would only account, that plastic would only account for 3% of the world's concrete use. That's amazing. That means that all this low quality mixed dirty plastic that will never get recycled in our recycling streams can now be used for something very valuable. Habitat for Humanity is working with this already in Central America. We're going to be using it in Cambodia. 125 houses, 6 or 8% in the blocks. That equaled 68,000 kilos of community plastic material being cleaned up and used in a very long-term value-adding proposition, which is concrete. And it doesn't need to be just for low-income homes. It could be used for all kinds of paving and cement uses and structures. It's structurally sound, fire, all of that's been tested. So I think with that, Felix, I'm going to stop. I don't know if there's questions, but this is how you can find me. We do a lot of different things. I didn't talk about all of them, but those are some of the angles that we try to work on in the different touch points, and would love to hear from some of you if any of this resonates.
Thank you very much. Very clear message, Doug. I have one idea. Do you have a message for the kids? The kids are our future, right?
Right. So for the kids, I would say try not to use plastic when you don't need it. When you see it at the store, if there's a banana wrapped in plastic, buy a banana that's not wrapped in plastic. Anything you can avoid is great. Don't use plastic plates and forks and knives at your birthday parties and your events. Think of other ways you can use materials and clean them. Every step like that makes a big difference. And the other thing is just be proud, pick it up. Just be proud, pick it up. Just be proud, pick it up. When you're on the street, pick it up. Don't worry about your fingers getting a little bit dirty. Pick it up. People will watch you. They will wonder what you're doing. And they're going to say, wow, that person just picked that stuff up and it's not theirs. Why'd they do that? That creates curiosity. It creates new thinking, and it gets people infected to do good stuff. And that's a good story. So kids can do that and show their friends that they care about the area that they live and walk around in.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Doug. We hope to hear from you again.
Thank you so much, Felix.
And all the luck.
Appreciate it. Okay. Thanks for having me on.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.